Hello and welcome back to the UKSIF Leadership Podcast and our 12 Days of UKSIF-mas series, where we are spending 12 days breaking down what we've been working on, big moves and big news in sustainable finance sector. I'm Sally, and today I'm joined by the UKSIF Chief Exec, James Alexander, for the 9th day of UKSIF-mas, where we will be covering 9 hottest global months on record. James, thanks for joining me.
Great to be here. Thanks, Sally.
Before we dive straight in, it might be useful for the listener if I give a bit of background. Research conducted by the World Meteorological Organization tells us that 2024 is on track to be the warmest year on record, after an extended streak of high global temperatures. From January to September 2024, the global mean surface air temperature was 1.54 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average. There is a margin of uncertainty there of about 0.13 degrees Celsius, but this warmth was also boosted by a warming El Niño event, according to an analysis of 6 international datasets. The report was issued on the first day of COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, and it definitely highlights that the ambitions of the Paris Agreement are really struggling to be met. James, firstly, what's been the impact?
Well, I think the first thing to point out is you mentioned 9 months consecutively of above or record temperatures, and that was January through to September this year, every single month that we've got the data for. But it's not just them. This is actually, we're in 16 consecutive months at the moment, from June 2023 to September 2024, that were the highest on record. And, when you just think about that, for a second, the concept and the consequences of that, and that's having extremely real effects. And we know that climate change is happening already, and I think that's the really important thing. People used to think about climate change as something that was far off, not going to affect us now, but it was a long-term risk into the future. It's at best a medium-term risk now, if not an immediate risk. And that's, I think, the challenge that we're seeing. So in September 2023, we had a climate change-induced landslide, a big chunk of a glacier collapsed, that actually literally caused the Earth to vibrate for 9 days. Now, clearly that didn't cause much more than get seismologists excited, but we have had some really negative, devastating consequences. So there's been wildfires, there's been huge floods right across Europe. We've seen floods, including here in the UK, but we've also seen kind of unexpected and unusual weather. So we've had snow in London in November, and then just a week later, whilst the temperatures here in the UK got a lot warmer, it actually hit 26 degrees in the south of France, and that wasn't in the middle of the sun. That was at 4 o'clock in the morning in November. So, the climate is changing. We are seeing that happening. Now, obviously, an individual year exceeding 1.5 degrees does not necessarily mean that we've passed the 1.5 degree goal in general, or target or objective intent in general, but we are seeing the stark effects already. And this is, I think, one of the core messages here. This is not about saying 1.5 is fine and we're not going to see any consequence. We're not even at 1.5 and we're already seeing these negative consequences. People that are talking about, clearly the Paris Agreement, 2 degrees, well below 2 degrees. At 2 degrees, we see really, really significant impacts on the world's climate, and we're already seeing them at 1.5.
Yeah, brilliant. That's a really helpful overview of sort of the massive catastrophic effects that we're already seeing. If we bring this to our membership, investors often face a number of barriers to action, whether it's political, regulatory, or just plain market dynamics. But there's also a point when we need to stop accepting slow progress, right, as the status quo. I know we've touched on the political and regulatory landscape in previous episodes of this series, but can we briefly touch on it again? Are politicians in the UK, for example, receptive to making the country more investable for green finance, and what's happening in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I think politicians here in the UK are receptive to that. Now, obviously, that's not the case in all parts of the world, and we're seeing populist governments looking like they're on the rise across the world. But here in the UK, I think we do have politicians that are receptive to this. We saw incredible global leadership from the UK at COP29 recently in Azerbaijan. We've seen the UK government advancing quite a few different policies that they talked about in the election campaign, and then they're now moving forward forwards on. So we've already removed the de facto ban on onshore wind, set up GB Energy and put a lot of money behind that. Approved an interconnector for the grid between Scotland and north of England, and there's still talk afoot of a radical overhaul of the planning rules. Now, all of these are positive, all these are important, but we need to move further and we need to move faster. And so the UK cannot just rest on its laurels. But the good news is, our narrative is that we can grow the economy and we can become greener. And in fact, arguably, we can grow the economy by becoming greener. And that's where we see the opportunities for growth in the UK. And it's where we see the opportunities for investment. So that's what government has to now do, is create this vision for the future that investors can get behind, that highlights and demonstrates that we are the global leader in sustainability. And if you want to invest in sustainability anywhere in the world, the UK government will be supportive all the way to make sure that that's possible to happen here. Now, that's the narrative we need to get out there and we need to move forwards on.
Brilliant. And for any of the listeners who aren't aware, James is also, as well as his role as chief executive here, he's also chair of the GSIA, which is the Global Sustainable Investment Alliance. UKSIF is the secretariat of that group. But James, what's being done on that global scale?
So there's a lot happening globally, and just have to look at things like the ISSB, which is the International Sustainability Standards Board, recommendations that hopefully will be adopted here in the UK in the next year or two. We've got GFANS, which came out of COP26 that we held in Glasgow, and that brings investors from across the world together to make commitments around net zero. And of course, we see COPs and the COP process that rumbles on. But it's not just an international game. This is each country has to do its piece. And I was at PRI in person in Toronto recently. One of my reflections was that it does feel as though whilst we can have an international conversation and debate around sustainability, every country is going in their own direction. And we must get back to a period of considering and trying to find global interoperability of particularly sustainable finance regulation, and technology transfer across the world. Now, that does not mean a race to the bottom, and that's something we're really, really clear on. It means actually a race to the top, everybody aiming to bring in the top, the best regulations that they can, that are interoperable from one country to another. So a lot is happening on the global scale. Is it happening fast enough? Absolutely not. Do we need to do more? Of course. And the reality of we talked at the beginning of this podcast about some of the challenges we're seeing. Everybody must do everything they can further and faster. And in a context where we know large actors like the US probably for the next 4 years are not going to be doing everything they can, everybody else has to work a little bit harder to make sure that we continue the momentum and keep moving forwards on this pathway towards sustainability.
I know that you mentioned that every country is going in its own direction, but on that global scale, are we seeing a move away from 1.5?
I mean, the UN mantra has for a long time been keep 1.5 alive. They've always known that it's really, really hard to stick within 1.5, to stick with the global carbon budgets that allows that. As every day that passes, it gets harder to stick to 1.5. But I think we're seeing even some banks that are looking at saying, well, maybe we should set a 1.75 degree target. Our view very strongly is we need to stay with the course on 1.5. We can't admit defeat on this. It's so important, and that is already we're seeing so much change in the global climate just from being under 1.5. I think people underestimate just how bad 2 degrees will be, and that's why it's so important we stick to it.
Yeah, certainly. And with all the impacts of global warming and climate change that you outlined earlier, I think it's fair to say that we will see a shift in mindset. Mitigation is brilliant, and we all agree that more should have been done earlier on this, but we need to start thinking far more seriously about adaptation. The earlier we act, the cheaper and more effective our response will be. That being said, we can't stop trying to mitigate the climate crisis. I'm sure the majority of our listeners have all played the FT climate game. I know there was a big hit in the office. Me and James got very competitive, but it made it pretty clear that proactive action is always more, well, when it comes to climate, it's always more cost effective than reactive action.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That FT game is brilliant. We should make sure that we put it in the notes that so that people can access it. It's extremely hard to win the climate game, and that reflects reality. The pathway to success here is very narrow and getting narrower as time goes on. And then we're talking, COP has had a big conversation about developing countries and money going to adaptation and mitigation in developing countries. But I think one of the crucial things here is the more we start focusing on adaptation, so the longer we leave it to take action, the more people start to recognize how much the world's changing, the more the clamor for adaptation measures takes the priority and becomes the political narrative. And I think that's one of our really key worries is that once you've had a flood, the first thing you do call for is a better flood defense for your town or your city. So all the money that would need to be spent otherwise on climate mitigation, reducing emissions, then starts being spent on adaptation. So we must get this mitigation piece moving forward as fast as we can before the effects of climate change become too significant. And the other thing, of course, is you can't just adapt your way around the climate crisis. You can't find new places to grow crops that will no longer grow where they've been historically growing. You can't find new sources of water for large proportions of the world's population. We can't just adapt to everything. We can't just assume, oh, the problem is going to be more floods, and so we build sea defenses or we build new levees around our cities. A lot of these problems you can't adapt to, so we absolutely have to mitigate.
And I know this might be a touch tough, but is there a positive note to end on, James?
I mean, I think I'm still positive, and the reason I'm positive, well, one of the examples of where I'm positive is, just the other day we had our UKSIF Leadership Summit. It was an incredible day, but it also happened to fall on the same day that Trump's result, the election result, and 8 o'clock in the morning, we all found out that Trump had been elected as the next president of the United States, and that understandably through a bit of doom and gloom on the start of our conference. But as the day progressed, we heard more and more stories of the great things that people are doing, the work that's happening, the people that are saying, well, this is the area that I can influence. These are the things that I can do, and being so motivated to continue to up the game and move forward further and faster. So there's so much to do. We kind of underestimate how hard this task is, but there's so many passionate and committed people, organizations, companies, financial services firms that are really willing to move this forward. So I think we have to stay positive, and we have to believe that we can do this, and we can.
It is a positive note to end on. Thanks, James. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us on the ninth day of UKSIF-mas. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow for day 10. Remember to like and subscribe to be the first to hear our episodes. Thank you very much, James.